So welcome everybody. Really excited to chat with you today. My name is Kylie Rymanowitz. I am the Senior Manager of Curriculum at Hatch Early Learning. We are a small but mighty educational technology company. I've been working in the education field and early education for just about 15 years now, ranging from teacher to home visitor to curriculum developer. And now I help to create educational technology products that benefit both teachers and students. And then I'll let Kelly introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Hart, and I am currently in the role of Director of Customer Success at Hatch Early Learning. But prior to that, I was an educator of over 30 years in New Jersey. So I am so excited to see everyone in the chat saying hello from New Jersey and everywhere else. I have spent a lot of time working with funding and implementation. So I'm very excited to be here with all of you today. And hopefully Kylie and I can bring you some new ideas. Thanks for joining us.
All right, so let's dig right in. Our objectives for our time together today are to understand the role of data in driving student success and optimizing funding opportunities. We're going to discover real-world examples of how schools can use data tools to personalize learning and support students, teachers, and administrators. We'll explore some best practices for leveraging data to demonstrate need, showcase impact, and strengthen funding requests. And we'll gain strategies for transparent data reporting. Data analysis is going to lead us towards success. So our key takeaways from today, we're going to let you cheat and we're going to get you fast forward to the end of our presentation and tell you what you're going to get out of today. Our key points from today are that data-driven decisions transform student outcomes. Identifying trends leads to targeted interventions. Strong data stories can secure funding opportunities. Progress monitoring fuels personalized learning, and transparent data builds trust and drives impact. We're going to show you how all of these things are true over the next several slides. So we're going to start by understanding data-driven decision-making, what it is, why it's important, and how it works. So let's start by clarifying what data-driven decision-making actually means. Simply put, it's using concrete data to guide how we make decisions in the classroom and at the leadership level. Whether we're deciding how to adjust a lesson, support a student, or allocate resources, the data we collect helps ensure our decisions are intentional and effective. There are often 5 steps. There may be other models, but in the model we're going to use as an example, there are 5 steps to this process. In step 1, we collect data in various forms. Step 2 is where we analyze the data, looking for trends. Step 3, we're going to plan changes to the instruction or our other action steps. In step 4, we're going to teach using new strategies. In step 5, we'll reassess student progress. And then you'll notice step 1 is repeated at the bottom of this list because this isn't a one and done. Once we get to the end of this process, we have to start it over. This is a cycle. So once we have gone, we've made a change, we've reassessed students, then we have to start this process over again by collecting more data to continue to advance, to make changes, to make sure that we're providing the best resources and support we can for our students and our schools. We know that data plays a powerful role in education at every level. It helps teachers fine-tune their instruction. It allows us to tailor learning experiences to individual students and helps leaders make smart decisions about where resources should go. Think of data as the bridge between where we are and where we want our students to be. Here's how data impacts different parts of the education ecosystem. It informs how we teach, ensuring we're meeting students where they are. It shapes the learning experiences themselves, and crucially, it affects how resources are distributed, whether that's deciding to bring in extra support staff or investing in new instructional materials. Not all data is the same. We use a variety of data types to get a full picture of our students in classrooms. Formative data gives us real-time insights. Summative data gives us big picture results. Progress monitoring helps us see growth over time. And demographic data gives us the context we need to understand our learners beyond academics. Once we collect the data, though, what do we do with it? We want to use it to spot trends, like noticing consistent challenges in one particular skill or area. We can also use historical data to predict outcomes, which can help us prepare interventions before struggles become bigger issues. The real value is using data to make timely, informed decisions. But let's look at a real world example. Let's say in a pre-K classroom, a teacher uses a digital assessment tool to track early literacy. She notices that her students are consistently struggling with rhyming. So this is step 2 when we're looking at that data. Instead of waiting until a unit ends, she decides to take immediate action, and she plans how she's going to supplement or change her instruction. So maybe she's going to offer different rhyming activities and games. Maybe she's going to provide some materials that can be sent home for additional practice at home with family members. But some way she's going to change her instruction. Then she's going to implement these changes to her instructional plans and teach using these new strategies. As she collects more data over the next few weeks, she sees a real improvement. So let's summarize. The teacher used a digital tool to track early literacy skills. She identified a consistent pattern of struggle with rhyming. She immediately adjusted her instruction with new strategies, and she saw student improvement over the following weeks. This example shows us how data tools and data-driven instruction benefit students. But the story doesn't end with students. This improvement benefits the teacher by providing clear feedback on instructional effectiveness. It also helps administrators see where professional development or resources are needed, shaping systems-wide decisions. One small data point has the power to influence decisions far beyond the classroom. Now think about how data helps when students transition from grade to grade. For example, from a pre-K classroom or a transitional TK classroom to kindergarten. By using clear, consistent data, educators at both levels can align their expectations and strategies. It allows us to support students in each child's developmental journey seamlessly, and also gives us the opportunity to engage families in that transition as well. Now we're going to give you an opportunity to participate. So we'd love to hear some of your thoughts. Think about a moment when data shifted how you approached teaching. Maybe it changed the way you supported a student, adjusted a lesson, or influenced a broader decision. And pop your thoughts in the chat. And we'll share some ideas from you over the next couple of minutes. I know, thinking back to when I was a preschool teacher, my first year, so I literally went from my undergrad program. 4 days later, I was in a classroom, and wow, there were so many things I didn't know looking back. But I remember the first round of assessments I did, in the fall, going through every child in my little group. I realized that every child was scoring lower in measurement than we expected them to be. That was really important data for me to have as a teacher, because it told me I wasn't doing something right. It wasn't just one kid or two kids. It was kind of my whole group. So it really kind of forced me to think about how I was teaching and introducing some measurement activities, to do a little bit of research, to talk to some veteran teachers and get some new ideas. What about you? Think about a time when data shifted how you approached teaching or making an instructional decision if you're an administrator. Data show problems with phonemic awareness. That's a great point, Ingrid, and I think you are not alone in that. I think that's a particular data point a lot of people are seeing in a lot of classrooms across the country. And Rory says, we don't learn how to teach in undergrad, we learn how to teach in a classroom. Isn't that true? There's a lot to say about that personal experience. Yeah, maybe it's reteaching a standard with a different approach. More thinking about how you teach. So some people are saying more time in small groups or more time with independent work. So maybe it's not just the material you're teaching, but the methodology for how you're teaching it. Yeah, it helped me focus my teaching on one specific area. James says we've used diagnostic data in reading to create intervention groups based on specific skill areas. Yeah, that's an amazing way to utilize data to tell us kind of what we need to do differently to make sure that each child is getting what they need. Amazing. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts. So now that we've kind of level set about talking about data-driven instruction and this cycle of using data in education, we're going to explore a little bit about how data tools can impact instruction. So data tools can provide valuable supports for teachers and for educators. Data tools like child-facing assessments or games can help save teachers and administrators time and reduce their workload because these tools automatically collect and summarize data for them. These tools can also help ensure that the data we collect is accurate. It does this in a few ways. One is that it provides an alternative avenue for children to demonstrate their knowledge in ways they may be unable or unwilling to demonstrate elsewhere. I had a friend growing up who was painfully shy, very introverted. And so in a small group setting, for example, she wasn't demonstrating all that she knew because she was really focused on kind of being the wallflower, right? But in a tool that was child-facing and independent work, she may have had a different opportunity to demonstrate her knowledge. Another way it helps us ensure that we collect accurate data is that it removes our human bias, right? A digital data collection tool doesn't know if Sally is following the classroom rules this week. It's only providing information on whether or not she's mastered a particular skill. A third important point about data tools is that they help ensure that data is actionable because they summarize and analyze data on your behalf. Then all you need to do is make a plan based on that information that you're provided. The one thing that teachers never have enough of is time. You don't have the time to be analyzing a million data points every day. And if you're an administrator, you know that your teachers don't have the bandwidth to do that. So these data tools can take some of that pressure away and give teachers really actionable data, as well as actionable data for administrators. Whether it's tracking student growth, informing daily teaching, or shaping big picture decisions, data tools are essential at every level. They help us do things like track student growth, inform instructional strategies, personalize learning with data, support teachers, and allocate resources. I love this process here. It shows us assessment, gives us insights, which leads us to action, which then leads to student success. And again, this is a process that's not a one and done. It's a cycle that we then continue to make sure that we're providing that responsive support for students. We're going to talk about each of those things in a little bit more detail, starting with tracking growth. So tracking growth is essential beyond just test scores. Tracking growth shows us how students progress over time. It helps us identify gaps early so that interventions can happen sooner. And it provides evidence to advocate for funding, curriculum changes, or even additional support in your classrooms and your schools. Tracking student data includes using assessment tools to collect meaningful real-time data. It can be interpreting progress reports and dashboards effectively. And it can help us adjust instruction based on the trends that we see in that data. When you're interpreting a student progress report, some things that you want to look for are growth trends. So where are you seeing the most improvement? What are the trends where you're seeing these scores increasing? What are the areas of struggle? Again, is there a particular area of struggle that you see across a classroom or across a school, like phonemic awareness, for example? Or you could even look, further at that student level and say, maybe this one student is showing a lot of growth trends in literacy, but they're showing a lot of struggle in multiple math skills or in that math domain. You want to look for unexpected gains. And then you want to say, what happened? What was different? What did the teacher do? What was the classroom like? You want to look for improvements over time. And those student and class level patterns are going to give you really interesting data that you can then use to make decisions. Data can even inform professional development. For example, if multiple students in a grade level struggle with phonemic awareness, as we've talked about, teachers may need training in explicit phonics instruction. Maybe it's not just PD, maybe it's the classroom resources. Maybe there's something new that's needed. Now we're going to go through another real-life example of what this process looks like, but let's do it in a district-wide example. So let's say a school district implements a district-wide math progress monitoring tool. So across the district, in K-3, students are using this progress monitoring tool, specifically focused on math. Students play, and data is collected on their math skills and their math competencies. Then, teachers and administrators analyze the reports for their classes, and they realize that number sense is a weak area for many students across the district. So then administrators need to make a decision. What are we going to do with this information? So they're going to decide that teachers need more support in number sense. So they're going to provide additional professional development for teachers. They're going to go all in on teacher training and support for number sense because they can see that's a real need in their district. Then what's going to happen is, hopefully, teachers use this new knowledge from their teacher training to implement adjusted instructional techniques, including a family engagement component. Over time, the result that we're going to see is multi-level impacts. Student scores for number sense improve, teacher knowledge and instructional practices are enhanced, and administrators' understanding of the effectiveness of their curricular resources and the supports needed by teachers is going to increase. And family understanding of their child's learning and their resources to support learning at home can improve as well. Oh, I see a great comment that came in the chat too. Ideally, administrators would use data from teachers like surveys and observations to determine what the next step would be to receive PD on that specific topic. An amazing point. Yes, it's not utilized in this example, but critically important to think about what teachers know, what teachers want, because they're the ones on the ground in the classroom. They have a really unique perspective. And in order for those interventions or those action steps to be effective, we definitely want to have teacher buy-in and teacher support. Fantastic point. So let's summarize this example here. Students engaged with a math progress monitoring tool. The district identified widespread number sense weakness, and they supported teachers with PD and training. Teachers applied their new techniques, and they utilized family engagement. And then the district experienced multi-level impact for students, teachers, administrators, and families. What we know about data is that data helps teachers refine their instruction in real time. Without data, a teacher might continue with the same lesson plan, unaware that half the class is struggling. But with data, a teacher can pivot, provide targeted instruction, and improve student outcomes. Data also helps us personalize learning. In traditional learning, every student follows the same lesson at the same pace. But with personalized learning, students progress at their own pace, with data tools providing the right level of challenge. What a personalized learning tool can do is allow students to progress at their own pace, provide immediate feedback and additional support where needed, help teachers pinpoint where to focus their instruction. We know that personalization is one of the biggest benefits of today's data tools. Personalized data can adjust to a student's pace. It can support diverse learning needs, including the needs of English language learners, for example. And it encourages student ownership and engagement. And it's not just teachers who benefit from data tools. Administrators play a critical role by ensuring teachers have the right tools and the right training to use them. Administrators set the tone, fostering a supportive, data-informed environment for their schools. They're going to provide access to user-friendly tools, right? Not every tool is created equal. It has to be something that's appropriate and useful, and there has to be support, right? They can show and provide training for teachers on implementing data dashboards so that they can have clear insights into student progress at a glance. They can offer mobile-friendly platforms that allow educators to quickly access real-time data for instructional planning. And by utilizing color-coded reports and trend analysis features, they can make complex data easy to interpret and to act upon. Administrators can also offer professional development to help interpret data. They can do things like host interactive workshops where educators practice analyzing student performance reports and making instructional decisions. They can provide on-demand videos and quick reference guides on using data tools effectively. And they can create professional learning communities where teachers collaborate and review data trends and share best practices with each other. And finally, administrators can foster a data-driven culture, which is really important. They can help teachers celebrate successes by sharing how data-informed decisions have led to student growth and improved outcomes. They can encourage teachers to set data-informed goals and track the progress for meeting them. And they can ensure that leadership models data-driven decision-making, reinforcing its importance across all levels. It doesn't matter what you say, right? People will pay attention to what you do. It's really important that leaders and administrators also model the importance of this to show that it's really important to your district. From an administrator perspective, data tells us where to focus, whether that's staffing, materials, or intervention. We can allocate resources precisely where they'll have the greatest impact, ensuring every student and teacher gets the support that they need. To summarize the impact of data and data tools, tracking growth ensures that progress is visible and it's measurable. Real-time data helps refine instructional strategies, and personalized learning tools can meet students where they are. Data isn't just numbers, it's about student success. And from here, I'm going to kick it over to Kelly.
Thank you, Kylie, and thank you everyone for the amazing messages and comments in the chat. I'm going to call out some of those in these next couple of sections. So Kylie just gave us such a great overview of how important data is on a day-to-day instructional teacher support basis. And what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about right now is everyone's favorite topic of late, which is connecting data to funding opportunities. So up on the side here, you see some of the categories that we are familiar with funding as it stands now. And as our resource streams continue to diversify and shift, it really is more critical than ever that we take a proactive approach and use data to position ourselves, our teams, our schools, and our programs to be very intentional and strategic in our use of funding. Some of these buckets that are up on the screen are our current go-tos for a lot of the work that we talk about when it comes to academics or teacher preparation. So what we're going to talk about now is how to align our data to make sure that we not only can access, but we can sustain funding in each of these and many more categories. When we talk about connecting data to funding, there are always key factors to consider. When we look at our data in a precise way, it makes it easy for us to ask questions and think about the sources we'll use and the goals that we're setting. Whether it's local, federal, or state funding, the best way to illustrate our need for funding is to be very clear and specific about our path and our long-term outcomes. So where do we begin? First, you really want to understand eligibility, priorities, and application requirements for funding and grants within your organization, regardless of the organization that you're joining us from. This will likely require a conversation with grants coordinators or business administrators, but it is critically important to know the funding source and the goals that you are creating to align to that funding source. Next, you always want to be very clear and honest about identifying the need that you hope to address with the funding that you access. Align your data with metrics and look at the funding source closely before you design your response to your problem. Aligning key components before you get into developing an actual plan can really help keep you strategic and focused on the outcome. In your designing of your response or your plan, make sure that you're identifying data points that can show growth and show work around topics like student academics, equity gaps, and even program impact for students, their families, and teachers. Use your data to inform a very compelling story about the learning going on in your program and the impact that it will have long term. And finally, we know that we want to be smart in our goal setting, making sure that our strategic goals are specific and measurable. So, while you work on mapping out your action plan, it really is important to reflect on your own internal systems for data. You have to make sure that the goals that you design can be fully supported by data that is organized and accessible, not only by the leader, but the entire team and even stakeholders. It's very important that these key questions become part of your process for thinking about what your goals are, how you will fund your work, and then really most importantly, how easy it will be to report and show progress. So these questions are just some that you might be able to use to guide your planning and funding access. So the first one, are we collecting the right data? Does your data align directly to the goals for student achievement, equity, or just funding priorities that you have set? Are your data points kind of aligned or a little bit of a stretch? That will make it hard for you to keep progress monitoring alive and then also report at the end of whatever the grant time is. Secondly, you always want to ask yourself, how easily can we access and analyze the data we need? Do you have the right tools in your organization to track progress over time? And how is the data being presented from whatever source that you are using to collect? We always think about the number of clicks it takes you to get the information you need. And that's critically important, especially when you are leaning on a grant or a funding bucket that requires ongoing accountability. So make sure that your data is in one place, easily accessible, and in a perfect world, whatever platform you're using is doing some of the analysis for you by creating great reports or streamline visuals to help your team look at data. Next, you want to think about telling a compelling story. Kylie mentioned this before, and we all know this. Data is just one point in the story of student learning. It is really important to not only include numbers, but also some surveys or testimonials from teachers, parents, even students to really capture the process that you'll use to increase student achievement, learning, and even confidence as learners. Next, you want to always think about continuous improvement. Do you have a system in place that shows not only your growth points, but how you are responding when growth is slower or growth is quicker? Do you have a system that allows you to support teachers with small group activities or list of students who are not performing as well as other students in the group? Those are really important pieces, because one thing we don't want is for a data process to dump a lot of work on teachers. It takes them away from students or even leaders, because it takes them away from being instructional supports to classrooms. And finally, ask yourself, is our data supporting the funding application? As we know, some of the buckets that we go to for resource and funding have very specific needs and focus areas. You want to make sure that the data that you're using aligns specifically, for example, to a funding source that is specifically allocated for language learners, or a funding source that is specifically allocated for family engagement. You need strong data at your fingertips. So make sure that your internal system is really creating this smooth access and strong analytics when it comes to your data collection. Now, let's just think about those slides in the context of an example that I'm sure we all know well. If we think about the way a school or a classroom works, we're often moving toward metrics. One of my favorites is this one that's up on the screen, that all students should be reading on level by grade 3. I love that goal, but we as educators know that this work begins way before students even come to school. However, often the funders, whether it's local, state, or federal, are really looking for the return on investment and progress. We as educators are positioned to bridge that gap of understanding by simply taking a huge metric like this one and breaking it down into smaller pieces. The reason that this works is because by looking at smaller pieces over time, it really is much easier to track progress, to identify challenges, and most importantly, support students in the critical skills that they need. So when you think about data, you really want to make sure that your data sources are breaking down the skills that students need by grade level, by level, and also in connection with each other year over year. So in this example, it is an abbreviated list of how you might be looking at skills from pre-K over to K, first grade to second grade, all in the name of getting students to be reading on level by grade 3. When we think about connecting data to funding, like I just mentioned, you want to make sure that you're looking at data that really helps connect to data funding sources in small ways. One of the greatest techniques that you can start using as a data funding connection is to break your goals down so that you can start aligning to multiple funding sources as a way to build sustainability. So what might that all look like for a data team while they're working? It could look something like this. You know you want students to read on level by grade 3. We know that there are critical foundational literacy skills that students must have to meet that goal in grade 3. So the second column outlines maybe some example supports that your data team brainstormed and came up with. And then the third column shows what evidence and funding connections those supports may match with. So for example, and Christopher, you mentioned this before, teacher surveys and teacher development would match up beautifully with Title II. Family engagement might match up with a preschool development grant, early literacy funding, IDEA, Title III. So when you start thinking about what strategies will you need to use to build skills toward that big metric, you need data to show where you want to focus your resources, your energy, and your planning. If you ask the right questions about your goal, match the right data to your response plan, you really are positioned not only to move students to great heights of literacy, mathematical, and self-development, but in this time, you are especially positioned well to advocate for funding, its consistency, and its availability to schools. So take a second to reflect on those few slides that have kind of framed out a way that you can approach data to align to grants and funding. Were there any new ideas or strategies that you'd like to explore with your data team when you get back to work? Or do you have any ideas to share that match up with this process? Please share it in the chat with us. That's great. Thank you, Christopher, for that comment I was reading. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so just keep thinking about that and the need to be pretty granular. I'm going to borrow that word from Christopher's comment when you're looking at data compared to funding sources. So next, let's talk a little bit about the strategies that really should be present in your organization to develop sustainable funding pathways. The first one is that we know that the connection between data and funding is critical. You've heard that for the last 36 minutes from Kylie and from me, that clean data that is accessible is just a critical component to using data, not only to drive improvement, but to also access and sustain funding. So let's talk about 4 key strategies that we want you to come away with today that will really, really help you organize and analyze data for multiple purposes within your organization. First, we know that we want to tell a compelling story with data. Second, we want to think about dashboards, how we're analyzing, organizing, and communicating our data as growth and goals. Third, we want to build funder and stakeholder relationships through being transparent with data. And then finally, we want to make data a routine process within our organization. So let's look at each one of these quickly together. We talked a few times about a compelling story with data, knowing that it's not the number alone that makes an impact when you're looking for funding or, quite frankly, looking for partners or buy-in, whether from teachers or families. So this slide is a really helpful overview of how you might turn just simple numbers into a compelling story with data. Make sure that you have the quantitative numbers. Always include as much qualitative data as you can, success stories, surveys, like we mentioned before, even testimonials from students or families. Use visuals to make sure that all the numbers that we talk about and all of the education speak that we use is clear to our audience. And then finally, make sure that you frame data as evidence of success in the most specific way that you can. So instead of giving a general term like 15% of students read at a higher level, you might start using language like is shown on the slide. For example, 85% of students improve their phonics skills, meaning that they are on track for early reading success. Using things like that really does turn numbers into stories, and it helps buy-in grow from the people that are not only within your organization, but are outside of your organization as well. Next, we love a great dashboard. Through all of my years of teaching and leading, spreadsheets or Word documents, Google Docs even, started to become the way that we capture data. And when we moved over to using a strong dashboard that allowed us to see multiple facets of the same data at the click of a button, we really, really felt a lot more success in student growth, in teacher development, and then being able to report with specificity to all of our stakeholders. So the first thing that you want a dashboard to show are growth trends. Growth trends obviously are year over year or grade over grade, how students are performing. It's not just a single data point that we want to share. We want to make sure that we can have data points for cohorts or grade levels over time. The next thing that we would love a dashboard to do is to target goals. If your dashboard is not allowing you to see where you were and where you've grown to all in a single shot, that might mean it takes more work by the data team leaders or teachers to figure those numbers out. So you really want to make sure that you can use a dashboard in a very quick way to communicate your growth and then also show the goals that you still have ahead of you. And then finally, you want a dashboard to help you disaggregate data. If your dashboard is able to take the same data that you looked at for targeted goals and break it down by grade level, age group, language status, time in school, attendance, that will help you, again, make really quick decisions about the data you're using to track student growth and to access funding for your students. Building partnerships with funders and stakeholders is very important, and the way to do that is to be very transparent in your communication. So your dashboard, again, should be able to help you communicate with varied audiences through visuals, through tracking progress, and then also just through bridging conversation. One of the things that we really support is to share the same data with parents that teachers are seeing, share the same data with your stakeholders that leaders are seeing, because that really helps build trust and then support for the long term. And then finally, but really most importantly, in my opinion, is you have to make data analysis a routine. You really have to create a system where there is multi-level involvement around organized data, clear goals, and continuous progress monitoring. So these are just some tips that many of you probably already use, but setting a time for student data analysis, whether it's monthly or quarterly with teachers and support staff, is very helpful. Training teachers, coaches, even leaders specifically on a data protocol is really important, but it helps you keep data not as sort of the I got you conversation, but as a problem solving and a progress monitoring conversation. So training in a data protocol is just critical, and it makes everyone feel good, honestly. You really share the joy of data when everyone on your team knows how to use it well. And then finally, just always encourage collaboration. No matter what level of the organization someone is at, their insight is critical when it comes to using data to drive outcomes and even access funding. So now, to bring it all together, just take a second to reflect on these 4 key strategies. And while you're reflecting, just think to yourself, is there any one strategy, or maybe more than one, that you can add to your current data protocol? And are there people that you want to add to your data journey who are not currently part of it? And thank you. Kylie, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to remind you of the cheat sheet I gave you at the beginning of our presentation today. These are the high-level key takeaways from our presentation today. Data-driven decisions transform student outcomes. You can use student growth data to refine instruction, personalize learning, and improve results. Second takeaway is that identifying trends leads to targeted intervention. So you can spot learning patterns early and make strategic adjustments to boost achievement. We also know strong data stories secure funding opportunities. Kelly gave us a really detailed look through about why these data stories, compelling stories, are really important. They allow us to leverage student progress data to strengthen grant applications and demonstrate impact. We also know that progress monitoring fuels personalized learning, and using that real-time data to adapt instruction helps us support students at all levels. And then finally, transparent data builds trust and drives impact. It's really important that we use data to foster stakeholder confidence with clear reporting and collaborative data analysis. So we have some time for Q&A. I've seen a couple of comments. One just came into about how family engagement is so important. I think it's critical to everything that we do, that family buy-in, families feeling connected is really important. So we've had a couple of really great questions come in. The first one I want to talk about is what data are collected to determine which teaching practices in a school lead to improved student learning on specific content standards. That is a detailed question. And actually, I think I have a feature to be able to show that to you so you can see that. There we go. Because that is it's a long question to read and process. I'm a visual learner. This is such a really important question. It's one that gets to the heart of using data meaningfully in early learning environments. helps us determine which teaching practices are truly effective. So schools and districts often gather multiple types of data that can be triangulated to show that impact. And we talked really briefly about some of those different types of data. One being that formative assessment data gathered through like observations, checklists, student work samples, or digital tools. They could utilize summative assessment data, so those standardized assessments align to content standards. That's important. Somebody also mentioned this in the comments, which I think it's really important to talk about too, is implementation fidelity data. So to determine the effectiveness of a teaching practice, we need to know how well it's being implemented. I will tell you, when I was a preschool teacher, my director was like, oh, this literacy curriculum is going to change your life. And she brought it into my classroom, and I looked at the first activity, and it was going to take me 45 minutes to plan for it. And I didn't implement it. I just didn't. It wasn't realistic. And so if they had looked at data on student achievement, it wouldn't have actually been tied to that curricular resource. So that implementation and fidelity data is really important to make sure that you know how it's working and how it's really being utilized. You may also use things like teacher reflection and instructional logs. So it might be like teacher journals or logs that document which instructional strategies teachers used, who they use them with, and when they use them. You compare that with student outcomes. And another thing I want to mention is student engagement. So engagement is tightly linked to learning. So you may also have observational tools and surveys to help determine how different teaching approaches affect student participation as well. Kelly, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you covered it. I really appreciate this question so much. I would just say, ask the teachers, quite honestly, like just ask them, survey which practices have you used that work, where do you need support. Don't be afraid to just make it that informal, because I do think that there's a lot of great information just from the day-to-day work that everyone is doing. But yeah, that was a great question.
Perfect. We'll hit to the next one here, which is any tips on collecting the right data and how much data should be collected? I have some ideas, Kelly, but I want to kick it to you first to see if you have any thoughts.
I would definitely use the less is best mentality here. But I think that, Patricia, this is a great question, and I think it really depends on what your classroom or school is like. You've got to collect data that matters. You should not duplicate data. And really, I really do mean it, less is best. When you get the groove down of, I want to know about concepts of print, that's the data I will collect. It really does help your organization become more efficient.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'll add to that a few things. I think less is best is key. I also want to mention that there should be a focus on quality over quantity. Sometimes our first thought is like, well, if I have more data, I can do more with it. But we want to make sure we're focusing on that quality data. A few well-chosen measures that are collected consistently can provide deeper insight than a flood of information that's going to end up being disconnected. And then we also want to make sure that your data points are sustainable. If data collection becomes a burden, it's unlikely to last or to be useful or something that we're going to do with fidelity. So it has to be a tool that can be sustainably utilized, I think, when we're collecting data. And then one more thought I have is making sure that we're using data to drive action, not just for documentation. So data should always lead to decisions, whether it's changing a grouping strategy or trying a new instructional technique. If data isn't informing teaching, it's just paperwork, and nobody needs more paperwork. All right, I think we've got another question that has come in here. So head to this next question. How much adherence to a curriculum versus teacher professional decisions can be used? This is a great question, Angie. And it's one that doesn't have a cookie cutter answer, right? Fidelity is important, especially when we're evaluating effectiveness. So having some level of consistent implementation is really important, especially if we're comparing classroom to classroom or teacher to teacher or school to school. We need to know that a program or a curriculum is being delivered as intended before we can judge whether or not it's working. But we also know that professional judgment is critical. Teachers don't just follow a script, even though you have your standards that you're supposed to teach to, right? We know that you don't just follow a script. You have to respond to the children that are in front of you. So it's important that we recognize that responsive teaching is an important part of this process. So I think structured flexibility is like balance in between the two is really important. So as much as we can stick to that fidelity, and then we have to do some of that intentional adaptation, not abandoning, the key points of the program or the curriculum, but adapting what we need to adapt to make sure that it's effective. Do you have any thoughts, Kelly?
No, perfectly said, Kylie.
Amazing. I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A section here, but I do want to mention something that came up in the chat while Kelly was presenting. A conversation was occurring in the chat about using AI to create some like summaries of data and reporting of data. I think it's a really timely question to use. And comments were made in the chat, and I want to make them here too, that first and foremost, you have to think about data security. When we're talking about potentially inputting student data into AI, you have to go back to FERPA and your data security and data privacy standards that you have to follow. That's really important. But AI has some options, like some ways that you can utilize it to help tell that story. So I think a way to think about it is not necessarily entering your raw data as it is into AI, but using AI tools to help you figure out how to tell that story. So you could do a hypothetical like, hey, ChatGPT, for example, I have data that says X% of students improved over 6 months using curriculum Y. I want to tell this story to funders. Like, here are the top 4 things the funders are looking for. Here's all the information, it's de-identified. How can I put this together to tell an interesting story? And I think AI tools can give you an outline that you can then use to make that data story without having to put your actual data into the tool, because we want to make sure that we're protecting student and teacher data. That's really important.
That is so true. And Kylie, just quickly, another great question popped up about data in a Montessori setting. Oh, thanks. And I do think that this is so critical. Damien, thank you, because I think that we shift away from realizing the value of collecting data around play, especially with preschool, kindergarten, even some first grade classes. So my thought on collecting data is stick with the philosophy of Montessori, but look for opportunities where data can be linked. And you can do that in a variety of ways, but it is really just as important to have data about the way children have progressed and how they interact with one another as it is how well they're reading. So I love that question. Thank you for bringing it up. And then just on the AI piece, I do think, Kylie, you are right that using AI for reporting is a great, great way to get succinct answers. And I would say that that is the recommendation right now, rather than popping students and information in. But I'm sure you all saw there's going to be some real upcoming debate on AI, but there's a big support to AI in the classroom. So 2 great questions, but Damien, please reach out to us because we would love to talk to you about data collection in Montessori. I would love to learn from you, but please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. And heading back to AI for a second, we had Christopher make a comment in the chat that a lot of assessment vendors are more likely to be incorporating embedded AI assessments into their tools in the near future. And I think that's where we're going to, which is hopefully a way to utilize AI that's safe, again, prioritizing that data security and making sure that we're following those data compliance standards. Amazing. Let me check the question box one more time. I don't think we have any additional questions. We are just about right on time. So I'm going to do a couple of wrap-up slides here, and then we will get you all on your way. So we want to also give you an opportunity, as Kelly mentioned, to chat more with us. We love to talk about data. We love to talk about funding. We love to talk about early learning. So if you want to learn more about using data to drive instruction, or how digital tools can impact student achievement, or how you can use data from digital tools to create some of those impactful data stories, we would love to chat with you more. You can scan the QR code on this slide here, and also some information will be sent in follow-up emails as well. Thank you again so much for attending. It has been lovely to chat with you all. It's been great to have your participation in the chat and your questions coming in. We hope you have an excellent rest of your day, whatever day it is that you're watching this recording, if you're watching us in the future. But again, thank you so much for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.